Tax return dates Australian property investors must know. Missing a tax deadline is not only stressful, but it can actually set a tax return back and potentially result in fines or legal penalties. Never miss an important date again by adding these following dates to your calendar. The key dates for this year, January 15, February 28, March 31, May 15, June 30, October 31, and December 1. Tax return lodgement dates vary between individuals, companies, trusts, and partnerships. The key factors that determine an individual or entity's relevant return date is the amount of their tax liability, entity size, and if they lodge their tax return themselves or do so through an accountant. So how to keep track of income and expenses throughout the year. January 15, so large and medium trusts with an annual total income of more than 10 million in their last lodged and were taxable in the latest year must lodge their previous financial year tax return by 15th of January. Large and medium entities, excluding individuals whose 2021 tax return was taxable, must lodge their tax return by the 31st of January unless required earlier. February 28, large and medium entities, including new registrants and new registrant self-managed super funds, unless required earlier, must lodge their tax returns by this date. Large and medium trusts with a total income of more than 10 million in the latest year lodged and non-taxable must lodge their tax return by this date. Large and medium taxpayers whose 2021 return was non-taxable, including entities whose 2021 tax return was made not necessary by 30th of June 2022, must lodge their tax return by this date. Subsidiary members of a consolidated group that exited the consolidated group in the financial year and new registrants of head companies of consolidated groups must lodge their tax return by this date. March 31, individuals, partnerships and trusts, excluding large and medium trusts with a tax liability greater than 20,000 must lodge their tax return from the previous financial year by this date. Companies and super funds, excluding large and medium taxpayers with a total income of more than 2 million in the latest year lodged, unless the return was due earlier, must lodge their tax return by this date. May 15. If an investor lodges their tax return with an accountant, they must lodge their previous financial year's return by this date. Although not an official lodgement due date, a concessional arrangement is available where any penalties will be ignored if returns are lodged and paid for by June 5. Individuals, partnerships and trusts must be eligible for the 5th of June concession date if they meet the Australian Taxation Office's requirements. Non-profit organisations with a requirement to lodge and which haven't been allocated to an earlier lodgement date must lodge their tax return by this date. New registrants, excluding large and medium taxpayers, head of companies of consolidated groups and self-managed super funds must also lodge their tax return by this date. All remaining entities who lodged their return via an accountant must lodge their return by this date. The end of the financial year, June 30, is a key date that should be marked in everyone's calendar. Taxable income and expenses are measured in each financial year. Investors are encouraged to pay all the expenses they can before the end of the financial year to get more back in their pocket at tax time. Where possible, expenses such as interest, insurance, tax, depreciation schedules, and other ongoing expenses should be prepaid before this date so that they can also be claimed in the same financial year of payment. October 31. If an investor is lodging their tax return through the ATO's online My Tax portal, they must lodge their tax return of the previous financial year by October 31. The same date generally applies to self-lodged returns, including partnerships, self-managed super funds, trusts and sole traders, unless lodged through a registered accountant or otherwise advised. Entities with one or more prior year tax returns outstanding as of 30th of June 2023 and other entities who've been advised to lodge earlier must lodge their tax return by this date. Entities prosecuted for non-lodgement of prior year tax returns that have been advised to must lodge their tax return by this date. And the last date for the year, December 1. Companies that are not full self-assessment taxpayers must lodge their tax returns by this date. Interested in more details? Check the comments for details.